we will wait upon the Lord, we will wait upon the Lord our God. You reign forever, our hope, our strong deliverer. You are the everlasting God, the everlasting God. You do not faint, you won't grow weary. You're the defender of the weak. You comfort those in need. You lift us up on wings like eagles. Strength will rise as we wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. Strength will rise as we wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord our God. You reign forever, our hope, our strong deliverer. You are the everlasting God, the everlasting God. You do not faint, you won't grow weary. You're the defender of the weak. You comfort those in need. You lift us up on wings like eagles.
This is a reading from Genesis chapter 45, verse 25 to chapter 46, verse 7. So Joseph's brothers went up out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. And they told him, Joseph is still alive. He is even ruler over all the land of Egypt. He was stunned. He could not believe them. But when they told him all the words of Joseph that he had said to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. Israel said, Enough, my son Joseph is still alive. I must go and see him before I die. When Israel set out on his journey with all that he had, and came to Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's own hand shall close your eyes. Then Jacob set out from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried their father Jacob, their little ones, and their wives, in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They also took their livestock and the goods that they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and they came into Egypt, Jacob and all his offspring with him, his sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters, all his offspring he brought with him into Egypt. And now a reading from the New Testament, John chapter 8, verses 12 to 20. Again Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Then the Pharisees said to him, You are testifying on your own behalf. Your testimony is not valid. Jesus answered, Even if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid, because I know where I have come from and where I am going, but you do not know where I come from or where I am going. You judge by human standards. I judge no one. Yet, even if I do judge, my judgment is valid, for it is not I alone who judge, but I and the Father who sent me. In your law, it is written that the testimony of 2 witnesses is valid. I testify on my own behalf, and the Father who sent me testifies on my behalf." Then they said to him, "Where is your Father?" Jesus answered, "You know neither me nor my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also." He spoke these words while he was teaching in the treasury of the temple, but no one arrested him, because his hour had not yet come. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So I'm Erin. I'm a congregant at St Mary's, and I sometimes lead our contemplative group, Be Still. We're focusing this week on the Old Testament reading, where we see Jacob trying to discern whether a big, unexpected, difficult change is the right course of action in a time of economic pressure. Let's pray. Thank you for your word, Lord, and thank you for this opportunity to hear it. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight. Amen. So this is the 3rd reading in our Times of Transition sermon series. And isn't it wonderful that the ministry team chose to focus on this theme at this time? And we've been so enriched by reflecting on the changes that were faced and embraced by the patriarchs. Chris has expanded on Abraham's story, and Phil has expanded on Jacob the deceiver wrestling with God. And today's reading is also about Jacob and his family. Jacob, Isaac's son, who was Abraham's son. But this reading sees Jacob about to leave Canaan, the land of his fathers, the promised land. So what happened there? Our reading comes right at the end of the amazing story of Jacob's son Joseph, of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat fame. The story about Joseph is full of twists and turns that lead us to this point, but the whole story is across 10 chapters in Genesis 37 to 47. You'll be glad to hear that I'm going to leave a lot out. Jacob's family was living in Canaan, the promised land where Abraham had brought them. Joseph was one of Jacob's many sons by his 4 wives, and these sons didn't always get along. There was a lot of jostling for position. The other brothers could tell that Joseph was Jacob's favourite son by his favourite wife, Rachel. And Joseph, on top of this, was also a tactless teenager who got his brothers' backs up by saying things like, "I had a dream where you all bowed down and worshipped me." I mean, that's annoying, right? But they were annoyed to the point where they sold him to Egyptian slavers, which you obviously shouldn't do no matter how annoying your brother is. The brothers tell their father Jacob that Joseph has died, but unbeknownst to his father and brothers, Joseph thrives in Egypt because God is with him, and he becomes very powerful, the second in command to the Pharaoh. So Jacob and the brothers are in Canaan, the promised land, while Joseph is thriving in Egypt, and they don't know what's happening with each other. Now, another important piece of context for this reading: there's a time of famine in the region, in both Egypt and Canaan, as has happened in earlier times in Genesis. Let me just talk about famine for a minute. We know now that famine doesn't usually mean total universal crop failure due to drought, for instance, or a sudden change of literally no food for anyone anywhere. Famines are usually about there being less, about scarcity and lack, economics, prices, and failing supply chains. Food gets more expensive until many people can't afford to buy sufficient food to survive. And when we reach a critical threshold of mass starvation, we call that a famine. But even then, let's be real, Pharaoh wouldn't go hungry. Rich people can nearly always afford food. Even in times of extreme famine, the very rich can still afford food. And although many of us here won't be going hungry, I'm sure that food bank volunteers will testify to the enormous economic pressure that some people are under today that affects their food supply. So without wanting to exaggerate, we can draw some parallels between Jacob's time of famine, worrying about how to feed his family, and the pressure some people and organizations are facing in our current cost of living crisis. Okay, now there's a famine and there's Joseph, who has become powerful, and God has been working through Joseph, and indeed working through Pharaoh's trust in Joseph and Pharaoh's care for his people, to ensure that there is grain in Egypt despite the famine. So Egypt is a place with resources due to Joseph's influence, which is, of course, due to God. So Jacob, facing economic hardships, has sent the brothers to Egypt to try to get some grain, and they encounter Joseph. Joseph has not forgotten that they tried to sell him into slavery. I mean, you wouldn't forget that. But eventually Joseph sees that his brothers' characters have really changed, and he forgives them. And more, he invites them to a secure future living in Egypt. He says to them, "Go back to Canaan and get Dad and bring him here. I want to see him and feed you all and keep you all safe during this terrible time. I want you to settle here." So the brothers set off to Canaan to bring this news to Jacob. But now imagine you are Jacob. You've lost a child, and now you're facing famine. You have sent your remaining sons to Egypt to see if there is some solution to your cost of living crisis, and you are waiting at home in Canaan. Don't forget, you're pretty old by this point. You are tired, you are physically frail, and you are scared about how to provide for your family. And you're wondering about how God's blessing on Abraham can come true in this, the promised land, where there's a famine. And you sent your sons to this foreign land seeking food, even though it was dangerous and risky, and you just want them to come home safe. So in our reading, Jacob sees his sons returning with carts full of the good things of Egypt, as well as grain and bread. And I'm sure at that point he is mightily relieved. But then he hears news so incredible that some translations say his heart stopped, that his lost son Joseph is actually alive. Now, obviously, Jacob wants to be reunited with Joseph. Of course he does. But the news is actually more than that. Joseph has said, "Come to Egypt, where I can provide for my whole family. Don't just come to Egypt for provisions and then return to Canaan. Come to Egypt to settle." What an answer to prayer! Except, let's remember, Egypt was not on the cards for Abraham's family as far as any of them expected. They're already living in the promised land, aren't they? They've settled there where they were told to by God. Grandpa Abraham was told that Canaan is the promised land. And Jacob's father Isaac was explicitly told not to go to Egypt the last time there was a famine, which was Genesis 26. So Egypt wasn't in the plan as far as Jacob could see. So Jacob, wanting to see Joseph and wanting his family to be fed, tells the family to pack up everything and they begin the journey. But when they get to Beersheba, which is the point where the desert begins, the desert between Canaan and Egypt, Jacob thinks, this is it. This is the point where this decision really becomes real. I'm leaving the promised land now. I am taking my family out of the promised land. I'm going to have to cross this desert to get into Egypt, and after this point, I am really committed. So Jacob seeks discernment. He prays again and offers a sacrifice to God, a way of saying, I need you now, God. I'm praying for your blessing on us. And of course, even today, we don't take decisions about how to move house or town or country lightly. These are momentous decisions in anyone's life, both for logistical reasons, because they involve a ton of work, but also because grown-up decisions are just hard. We rightly examine major decisions because we want to be sure that we're doing the right thing, even if it feels like survival is at stake. Even if there's a famine or a cost of living crisis and we're under enormous pressure financially, we want to do the right thing. And if you felt that God had put you somewhere for a reason, like Jacob's family felt, you would want to be really sure about it before you moved elsewhere, even if you felt that you had no other choice in order to survive. We know this, we relate to this, and we know as Christians that we can do more than just thinking about these decisions with our human brains. We can pray about them, like Jacob did, and expect God to respond and help us with these decisions. And God does respond to Jacob's prayers. Jacob has another vision. He's had these before. God repeats the promises that were made to Abraham so many years before. He says, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there. I myself will go down with you to Egypt. When God says, I am God, the God of your father, this is important because he's saying, yes, I'm the same God who spoke to Abraham and Isaac. The advice might be different this time, but it's still me. And God says, do not be afraid so often to people in the Bible. God knows that Jacob's family need to survive this famine because he has great plans for this family. And the promise to Abraham that God would make of him a great nation is now much more specific. I will make a great nation of you in Egypt, God is saying. This move is the answer to your prayers and a part of my plan for you. You need resources, and I am providing you with these resources and more in a new place, a place that can be a blessing to you if you'll trust me. Just like he promised his presence to Abraham, God is holding out his hand to Jacob to take, saying, I'll be right there. And Jacob does trust God. He overcomes his internal resistance to change, to doing things the same way his ancestors did. He is super brave and flexible. He does cross the desert into Egypt, not only a place that's hard to get to and no one else seems to be going to, but a place his family had been told not to go to by God. He understands through discernment and God's response to his prayers that different circumstances mean different instructions from God. He trusts that God has a blessing for him and his family in this new place. Jacob takes God's hand. And we know that God meets his needs in Egypt. His family didn't just survive, but thrived and prospered there. The promise of making a great nation of Jacob is a big story, a big future for his descendants. And we know what happens next. We know that Jacob's move to Egypt sets the scene for Moses and the Exodus and on through the generations until the birth of Jesus Christ. We know that the story of Israel is our story. We can see the purposes of God being worked out in the fact that Jacob's family survived this famine by trusting in God's blessing to go to Egypt. Now, at various points, when Joseph is reconciling with his brothers, the brothers who nearly killed him and sold him into slavery, he says to them, God sent me into Egypt before you to preserve life. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep you alive for many survivors. It was not you who sent me here, but God. Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good. And this is a message throughout Genesis, that God has taken all the questionable decisions that people have made and turned them for his purposes. And this sentiment is echoed in Proverbs 19:21. The human mind may devise many plans, but it's the purpose of the Lord that will be established. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to make good plans. And it doesn't mean that God accepts that whatever we decide to do was the best way for things to happen. It doesn't mean, for instance, that Jacob's brothers did a good thing in selling their brother into slavery just because God made it all work out. No one's recommending that we do bad things thinking God will figure it out. The story instead is that God is flexible in response to our fallibility. He finds new ways to meet us, new ways to bring good out of bad decisions and mistakes. And even if we make mistakes, like the patriarchs and their families, there's still going to be a next best option that we can step into, and God's purpose can still prevail. And this is freeing for us in terms of allowing us to experiment and try things and reach out for blessing and connection and resource in new places. I also just want to draw attention to the fact that God helps all the patriarchs to trust him by making promises that we can still trust today. He says, I'm paraphrasing, I know I'm asking you to do a really hard thing, but I will be right there, and good things will come of this time of upheaval and change that you can't even imagine. And in the gospel reading for today, Jesus makes the same promise to be with us. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness. So we've already been through a lot of uncertainty over the last 3 years, as a nation, as a church community, and no doubt on a personal level. And I'm sure I don't need to spell it all out for you. If you list it all in one place, it's kind of a lot. And there's uncertainty ahead. What will happen with the economy this winter? What will it be like being back in the church building? I have a lot of questions about the future which God in his wisdom probably won't answer for me. I've never been very good with making plans, but I don't really know what a 5-year plan would even look like for anyone right now. Wouldn't it be great if we had something to hang on to and help steer us? And of course, we have. We know God's always going to be with us because that is the promise he made to our spiritual ancestors, and because as Christians, we have God's presence within us as the Holy Spirit. And God's word is a light to our feet and a lamp to our path, but in terms of details, we only get a little puddle of light, just the next step or two. And we have to be in relationship with God every step of the way, not thinking we can do it in our own strength. We have Jesus' example here as well, regularly withdrawing to commune with his Father and be sure he's doing his will, because discernment is an ongoing process. So in terms of God's presence and his desire for continual intimate relationship with us, that's a reassuring thought. But in terms of knowing whether we're making the right decisions in a cost of living crisis, that might be harder in practice, both as individuals and families and as a church. It is perfectly normal to be scared when there's a big decision, normal to be doubting and wondering whether this is really the right direction, as we saw with Jacob. And we should be thoughtful about these kinds of decisions. We should want to get it right and not be reckless. We should wonder whether we're really being asked to leave our comfort zone. Are we really being asked to go to Egypt, this place we've been told not to go to in the past? Can we really be being asked to do that new thing? Is taking this giant leap in a new direction really the answer to prayer and the beginning of blessing? As a church navigating this time of famine and climate change, we have to trust that our God is still looking to preserve his people. Since you and I, we are his hands in the world and seeking to do his will, sometimes we may be asked by God to do things we didn't expect. But as Christians in community together, humbly seeking the right direction together, seeking like Jacob did at Beersheba, we have faith that God will give us discernment and wisdom because he gives those gifts to those who ask. And we should trust that God will meet us and guide us. We've never done it like this before is a normal human reaction to the prospect of change, but it shouldn't be the end of our thinking. The stories of the patriarchs are important not because they're exceptionally good people, not because they're holy in themselves, certainly not Jacob, but because they listened to God and trusted God and had a relationship with God. God put out his hand and said, "Come this way," and they put their own hands back in God's hand and said, "I don't get it, but I'll do it," and were blessed. So as individuals, as families, as a church, we might be asked to jump into the unknown at this time, just like Jacob was. And with prayer and listening and talking with each other and searching the scriptures and continually lifting up these issues to God, we trust that God's purposes will prevail and that God is with us through times of uncertainty and change. Let's take his hand.
You call me out upon the waters, the great unknown, where feet may fail. And there I find you in the mystery, in oceans deep, my faith will stand. Wherever you would call me, take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon above.